Welcome friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about something that's very important to my heart. This is my mother, Grace Jean Kelly. My mother was born on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota. She met my father, Harold Thomas Frazier, when she was in the Korean War in service. When she was 18 years old, my father, I think, was 20 or 21. Or maybe she was 19, I don't remember. Anyway, she was young. She was fresh out of school, and as soon as she could, she left the reservation, and that's where she went, and she met my father. My mother was a strong woman. She could handle so many different things in her life because she had to. My father, though I love him dearly, was an alcoholic. And he was an abusive alcoholic. He was abusive to my mother, and he was abusive to me and my 6 siblings. And so my mother had to be strong in order to feed and clothe and care for 6 children while dealing with my father. Now, my father left us when I was 14 years old. I never saw him again after that. I was angry at him for the things that he had done. I lashed out in ways that a teenager shouldn't. Promiscuity, drugs, alcohol, all the bad things. But deep down in my heart, I loved my father. And my mother, though she was disciplinarian, she was tough, I guess. That's the word I want to say. She's tough. And there were times when I hated her. But that was just my teenage reaction to her discipline. But deep down inside, I loved both my mother and my father. When I was 28 years old, my father contacted me. And he apologized for everything he ever did to me. It was a joyous time in my heart. It is what I wanted. By that time, I was off the drugs, I was off the alcohol, I was a baby Christian pretty much, and I had turned my life around. And what I wanted was a relationship with my father, and though I never saw him again, we talked on the phone. He would call me, and he told me that there were several times that at this time he was living in Tacoma, Washington. He was remarried and had another family. He was sober, and he was, I think, retired. Yeah, no, he was not retired. But he said that he would fly into Minneapolis or to, change planes in Minneapolis or something like that. I don't exactly remember what he said. And he said that he thought so many times, or not so many times, but when he was here in Minneapolis, he thought about calling me and coming to see me. Oh, how I wish he had. Oh, how I wish he had. So that I could see my father one more time as the man he now was. But it didn't happen. My father passed away in 1991 from asbestos poisoning. My mother passed away in 1996 from pancreatic cancer. Now, what I want to talk about is my mother. There are so many things today when I think about my mother, and I think about her every single day, and you gotta forgive me if I get choked up, because I get choked up when I think about my mother. I wonder to myself, did she really have friends? I never saw her with friends. I never heard her talk about friends. Did she have hobbies? I never really heard her talk about it, never saw her do anything. I know that when we were younger, she was a gardener, but she did that out of necessity. I don't know if she did that because it's something she liked. Maybe it was. But she had a garden, and she had an herb garden. She taught me how to garden. You know, did she travel? Well, I know she had somebody she liked. That picture that you saw was a glamour shot that she did for this person that she liked. But nothing ever came of it. My mother would go to the bar. Is that where she found her entertainment? You know, there are so many things. What did she think about? You know, what were her dreams when she was younger? I never asked her any of those things. And now I wish I had. The two things that I remember about my mother the most, actually I'm going to tell you 3 things I remember about my mother the most. The first one, I'm a little embarrassed to say, but I will anyway. I said my mother was strong. My mother, in her own way, showed that she loved her children. She would get so frustrated with us because teenagers are teenagers. We do things that we regret years later that we think are so important at that time, or that we can get away with. So in my rebellion, I skipped out of school a lot. And the principal or the school would call my mother and tell her that I had skipped out. I mean, there were times I climbed, when the teacher left the room, I climbed out the window of the classroom and took off. Well, one time I had skipped out of school, or maybe I didn't even go to school. I don't remember which it was. But my girlfriend and I used to like to walk the tracks that were not far from the school, or yeah, I don't think it was far from the school. And one day we had skipped out and we were walking down the tracks, and I looked down the tracks and guess who I saw? I don't know how she knew I'd be there at that time, unless she had followed me at some point and knew what I had done. But I looked down the tracks and there was my mother. And instead of running, I froze. My mother had a belt in her hand, and she gave me the whooping of my life. I remember grabbing that belt in my hand and telling her I hated her. And she said, I don't care. You're going home. Yeah, I didn't mean that, of course. I loved my mother. I was just a rebellious teenager. The second thing I remember about my mother is she loved coffee. Oh, there's one more thing too. My mother loved coffee, and she loved going to Perkins for pie and coffee. My nickname, my mother used to call me Jeannie Ree. And she would call me up and she would say, Jeannie Ree, let's go out for pie and coffee. Perkins restaurant had, I believe it was on Wednesdays, free pie if you bought coffee or a dinner or whatever, but it was pie and coffee. And so she would call me up and I would go meet her. It was at least a monthly thing, and sometimes it was a weekly thing. And we would just sit, and that was when you could smoke in the stores, and my mother would sit and smoke cigarette after cigarette, and we would just talk. But I don't remember what we talked about. I just remember that I spent that time with her, and I loved that time. It's something that I can look back on and remember. The other thing I remember, another thing I remember about my mother is related to smoking. She was a heavy smoker, and my mother would go in one room of her house to do whatever it is she was going to do. She would light up a cigarette and she'd put it in the ashtray. And she'd turn around and she'd go into another room and to do whatever she was going to do, and she lit up a cigarette and she put it in the ashtray. And she did the same thing all around the house. So she had a cigarette lit in every room of the house. Every one of my siblings and I remember that about my mother. And we used to joke with her about it too. And the last thing that really stands out in my heart, in 1995, I moved up north to Park Rapids, Minnesota. I was going through another divorce, my second divorce. I did not want that divorce. I loved that man, but things just didn't work. And so I packed all my bags and I moved up north to a trailer that my daughter had found for me up there. And I was living in a trailer court, of course. And my mother, I didn't have a telephone. Not till later, I had a cell phone later. One of the very first ones that came out, I think, I don't know. I was still using pay phones at that time. That was in 95, 96. But my mother would call my landlady. My landlady would come to my trailer if I was home, and my mother always knew when I was home, when I wasn't working. She always knew when I was home. My landlady would come and get me, and I would go sit in my landlady's dining room and talk to my mother. And my landlady didn't care how long I talked to her. We would talk for an hour at least. And I don't remember those conversations either. I just remember that time with my mother. When my mother became ill, we siblings took turns taking care of her. Now, of course, this was in 96, and I lived, 250, 300 miles away. I know it was a 3-hour drive anyway. And I worked in a restaurant, and I think I worked in a bookstore at that time too. So it wasn't easy to get away. So every time I would come to the cities, and every time I wasn't working and I could get away, I came to the cities and I took care of my mother. It was so heartbreaking to watch her deteriorate like that. And I remember my mother when she was in the hospital, when it was the end of her life. She had fallen in her living room. I was up north at this time. She had fallen in her living room, and she had laid there in her own body fluids. I don't know, for a day or two. I don't remember, but one of my brothers found her, and they called an ambulance, and she went to the hospital. Now, as she laid there, her temperature dropped. And so when she got to the hospital, for whatever reason, I don't understand, they had to take her off her morphine, her pain medication. And I remember going into her room. She was delirious. She really didn't know who anybody was in the room. But I remember her sitting bolt upright, her eyes as wide as saucers, and screaming because she was in so much pain. It was so heartbreaking to see this woman that I loved in that condition. And those are my memories of my mother. Now, what I want to talk about is, how do I say this? We only have one life. We only have one opportunity in this life to make an impression or to make a difference. Now, I'm not talking about just children to mothers. I'm talking about mothers to children as well. We need to communicate with those we love. We need to ask them questions. We need to ask about their dreams, their hopes, their plans, the things they like, the things they can't stand, about your own behavior. What is it you want me to change? whatever it is, we need to talk. I need to talk to my daughter. My daughter needs to talk to me. I need to talk to my grandchildren. My grandchildren need to talk to me. I need to talk to my brothers, my sister, and so on and so on. We all need to do this. Communication is so, so important because we're only given one life. And we don't know how long that life is going to last. It could be cut short, like my mother and my father. My father was 59 years old. My mother was 63. I'm almost 65. That's young. That's very young. They were cut short young. And I also know how much a mother's heart grieves. I didn't know it then, but I know now. I'm making this video because I know so many mothers, have spoken to so many mothers whose children are estranged for one reason or another. Whether they're busy, whether they're angry, whether they don't care. They're estranged, whether they're fearful. Whatever it is, we need to forgive. And we need to show that child that we love them, and we need to reach out to them. And the same goes with the child to the parent, or the friend to the parent, or the brother, or the sister, or whoever it is. A mother, or father, it doesn't matter, grandparent. We need to reach out, and we need to show that we care. We need to pick up that telephone and say, "Hey mama, how you doing? Hey sis, how you doing? Hello my daughter, how you doing?" We need to talk to one another. We may not get the chance tomorrow. So, that's what I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to express to you how important it is to talk to those that you love. If you like this content, I ask that you would please subscribe, and that you would hit that notification bell, that you would hit that like, and that you would comment. And I bless you, my friends. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. I love you, Mama. What I'd give if I could say, "Hello, Mama," in the same old way. To hear your voice and see you smile. To sit with you and chat for a while. So if your mother is still here, cherish her with care, for you'll never know the heartache until you see her empty chair. I miss you, Mama.